Hello, virtual Princeton. Welcome to Wintersession if this is the first event you're joining us for, and welcome back if you've been hanging out with us all week. I'm Judy Jarvis, Director of the Office of Wintersession and Campus Engagement. So glad to be here with you tonight. This is the second year of the university-wide Wintersession, which was created to bring joy and exploration, and importantly, non-graded opportunities to this new 2-week time in between the semesters. Undergraduate students, graduate students, faculty, and staff can all lead Wintersession workshops, attend Wintersession workshops, or both. And so in addition to offering workshops during the day and also into the evening, our office also organizes featured evening events, and you are at one currently, so well done. And it's a very good one, I might add, because tonight we get to tap into the wisdom, knowledge, and joy of Winnie Holzman, class of 76, who will be in conversation with her friend and fellow Princetonian theater professor Mark Nelson, class of 77. I thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Ro, who will be our host for the evening.
Thank you, Judy. My name is Ro van Wingerden, and I'm the project coordinator in the Office of Wintersession and Campus Engagement. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the second annual Life and Leadership Conversation at Princeton University, in which we'll hear from two alumni with distinguished careers in the theater and television world about their experience living the creative life. Winnie Holzman, Princeton class of 1976, is the writer along with Steve Schwartz of the international hit musical Wicked, which is now entering its 19th year on Broadway. She got her start writing for the television drama series 30-something and went on to create the series My So-Called Life. Her other TV credits include Once and Again, Huge, and Roadies. Winnie is currently writing the film adaptation of Wicked. Mark Nelson, Princeton class of 1977, has appeared on Broadway in Angels in America, Cabaret, The Invention of Love, Three Sisters, A Few Good Men, and Brighton Beach Memoirs, as well as off-Broadway in My Name is Asher Lev and Steve Martin's Picasso at the La Panagile. He has received the Obie, Drama League, and Lortel Awards and the L'Enfantine Fellowship. Mark taught theater at Princeton for 12 years and currently teaches and directs in New York at HB Studio and Circle in the Square. Winnie and Mark, it's great to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you, Ro. Hey, Winnie.
Hi, Mark Nelson.
It feels just like opening night at Theatre Intime in 1975.
Yeah, so much has not changed, right?
Well, just a little. We look almost the same. I'd still recognize you.
Well, thank you.
So we originally tried to figure out how to have a conversation about building a career in the arts, launching a career in the arts out of Princeton. And as Winnie and I talked about it, we realized that we both graduated without any idea in the world of what was coming next. We knew what we dreamed of. We knew what spoke to us, and we were hoping that each other would pull us through. But
well, I think that is probably a perfect, almost, jumping off point for a creative life, because
so we're shifting the focus from building a career to living a creative life, which often involves having no idea what doors will open for you, but being brave enough to walk through them when they're presented.
Yeah, exactly. And just being willing to live with a certain amount of in the dark, so to speak.
Yeah.
With a certain amount of confusion and not knowing, and the slight or the strong discomfort of feeling like you are lost, so to speak.
Yeah, and understanding that that's a part of the journey, that's part of being an artist.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would also like to add at this moment that meeting Winnie at Princeton was probably the most crucial of all the great things that happened to me in the 4 years that I was a student at Princeton, largely because I felt very much like a hopeless outsider while I was in my freshman year at Princeton. And the idea that that I had it in me to brave the rapids didn't really sink in until I saw this role model. and until I felt actually recognized by a friend.
Thank you so much. Well, I think that's also a big part of finding your way, is that we find each other. We find people who are in our tribe, so to speak, that are going to, in the audience, as you know, Mark, tonight is Mitchell Ivers, who, was who directed the play that you and I really bonded in.
Yeah,
right? The Typists at Theatre Intime when you were a freshman and I was a sophomore.
Yeah. Well, it was freshman week of
right. So I guess
74. So I was a new sophomore.
Right, and Mitchell directed us, and then and we were all friends. We are all friends, and then in my mid-20s, Mitchell directed me, if I may say that, to applying for this scholarship at NYU Musical Theatre Program, which is how I got started writing musicals. And without that program, which was life-changing for me, I probably would never have met Stephen Schwartz. So there's all kinds of ways in which the people in our lives really help our careers to blossom, to happen.
Absolutely.
They see something in us, or they see something in us, and they give us the courage. They sometimes see things that we can't see.
For sure. So I tell my Princeton students to hang on to their friends, and that along the journey, they'll be the richest resource that you have.
Exactly. Because you need to, I'll just speak as a writer. Writing can be, lonely. Of course, the kind of writing I do, eventually, hopefully you have a big crowd around you because you're making either a theater piece or you're making something for TV or a movie, and that involves a big community of people, usually, or a small community of people, but some sort of community. But what I was going to say is that writing can, even the kind of writing I do, can make you feel isolated and alone. And I think any artistic life, any life in the arts can make one feel a little bit isolated, and just the knowledge that you're not the only one going through something.
Yeah.
That other people, every frightening thing that we go through as artists, the people we most admire have gone through it. The people that we most look up to have had those kind of frightening, rejecting moments.
Yeah, and that's very encouraging, gives us courage to face those moments of rejection or desperation, and understand that in the seeds of that feeling of being lost is the next step in the journey.
Absolutely.
So when you were at Princeton, Winnie, you were a poetry major and you had never actually written a script.
Yeah, when I was really little, I used to write little musicals for my dolls, for my little troll dolls. Nobody knows about that. But
was one of them a witch?
No. But at Princeton, I except for the essays that I had to write as a partial English major, I had a concentration in writing poetry.
Right.
I was really writing poetry, and I realized later that all the poetry I wrote really was a great foundation for me, not only for dialogue writing in general, but also specifically, when you write for screen, like screen, and or if you write for musicals, brevity is hugely important. Getting to the place where you're saying a lot, hopefully with as few words as possible, becomes a big deal. And that's sometimes what poetry, certainly there's different kind of discursive poems, but a lot of poetry is distilling down big thoughts and emotions into a small amount of very pungent words. And so I feel like even though I wasn't planning any of this, instinctively, or maybe just fortuitously, by God's grace, or however you want to put it, by fate, I was actually studying and doing something that really, really ended up helping me in my work.
And also you were in a lot of plays at Theatre Intime, and you were absorbing dialogue and the structure of plays through
Absolutely.
all that.
And I was really also absorbing, I think about this a lot, because writing for actors is what I do, what I've ended up doing. And in order to do that, it's really helpful to understand actors in their position and their challenges, what they love, what makes them thrilled. I mean, after all, if you can write something that somebody really, really wants to play, say, that has the kind of challenge within it as a role that draws people to it, and then you can get perhaps some really, really interesting actors involved. And so I think that all my time at On Team, I had been acting before that, but certainly at On Team, it is indelible in my mind, because it was special because it wasn't a class, right? We were doing it in that way out of sheer love and devotion and excitement. And I found that more interesting than, I mean, there's so many great theater programs, and I know that Princeton now has a great theater program, but I personally loved what I was doing because it wasn't about a grade or a class or a professor. It was about just us getting together and making theater.
Yeah, exactly. My dad used to say I majored in Theatre Intime with a minor in English.
I definitely did that, I think. Although I didn't get into every show I wanted to be in, or there were times I wasn't in a show. But then we had this Mitchell, who's in the audience, who I mentioned before, who I gave a shout out to. He knows this really well. We did summer On Team. I guess that probably still happens. And
it's called Princeton Summer Theater now.
Right, and I did that for 2 summers, and that was, and actually Breon Gorman is in the audience tonight, and she played my sister in Picnic,
Madge.
And she played Madge, and those memories and all of that is such a great background for what we ended up doing, you and I, our lives in theater and my life as a screenwriter. I didn't plan it. I wouldn't have known how to plan any of that stuff.
But somehow you were being guided to where you were meant to be.
I feel like what happened is, at certain key moments in my life, people stepped in and gave me guidance and gave me encouragement.
Yeah.
And I think that you don't need that to happen every day or every week, but when that does happen, it really makes a difference. Especially, that's probably true of every career, but it's really true in the arts. I know that for a fact, because you're stepping into a kind of, you're stepping a little bit off a cliff and hoping that you'll grow wings. If that isn't too flowery.
So would you talk a little bit about the journey that led you to playwriting?
Well, it had to do with my comedy group. I think
comedy group. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I got out of Princeton, I went to acting school at the place you're teaching now, Mark, Circle in the Square. Yeah. And my parents were really disappointed. Understandably, I think, because they thought, well, Princeton's going to lead to something better than that. They were hoping, I think.
Yeah.
But what it did for me was, talking about a tribe, I met this guy, wonderful actor and writer named David Babcock, and he introduced me to his friends, and we formed a comedy group together. And I started doing that comedy group for years in New York, off Broadway and in nightclubs. And we weren't improvising, we were writing our own comedy shows, and I was performing with them and writing. So that was my transition out of poetry. I never wrote another poem after that. I just started writing material for our comedy.
Sketches, short plays.
And parody songs, and mostly sketches, but definitely some parody songs. And that was actually, that was the material I had to show when I applied to NYU Musical Theatre Program, when Mitchell encouraged me over and over again until I finally relented. And when I applied, I used my musical parodies that I had written. I'm a lyricist, not a composer. But I used the lyrics I'd written for my comedy group, and I used the sketches that I'd written in my comedy group. And so all of that was really my training ground. I mean, at the time, I felt like I was just having fun with my friends, and we really were having a blast. But it was education too. It was complete education of, finding out. I was up there on stage, so I was finding out viscerally what works for an audience, what people were connecting with, how to make something funnier.
Yeah. And then when you were in the NYU Musical Theatre grad program, your mentors were the greatest musical theater writers in our history: Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, Betty Comden,
Arthur Lawrence.
And so how did your writing advance and mature under their guidance?
Well, I think there's so many ways to answer that, and it's almost more than I can put into words. But
less than a minute, please.
Well, one big thing that it was is that these are men, and Betty Comden, I don't want to leave her out, but these were people, let me say, that I really admired and esteemed. And from my childhood, I've been listening to their work and, thrilling to their work. Yeah. So they got my full attention, you might say. And I wanted very much to write something worthy of their attention, I think and I don't even know if I did that while I was in school, but I was galvanized within because of my admiration and sense of awe about these people.
Yeah, it took you to a different level.
It took me, because it's that whole thing. I mean, it's become a cliche, but people talk about how if you play tennis, I mean, obviously I don't play tennis. I've never been able to, but if you play tennis with a better tennis player than you become better tennis player. I mean, that's sort of like my story with Stephen Schwartz. Like, Stephen is such a incredible writer. Mm-hmm. He's brilliant, and he knows so much about musicals, much more than I will ever know, I think. But writing with him pushed me to another level. I think, and I'm sure I forgot to ask you, but I know you've had experiences like that, Mark, where you're acting with someone or you're working with people. Absolutely. And they're pushing you forward. And that's a big thing in our lives, in our creative lives, right?
Yeah, those people that you occasionally meet that you click with in your work, who raise the bar for you and make you discover something you can do that you didn't know before you could do.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I remember vividly a moment with Arthur Lawrence, who, if people don't know, who
author of West Side Story and Gypsy.
Yeah, exactly, and the beautiful movie The Way We Were, and
right.
Arthur. I remember a moment when he looked at me. He had a laser, sort of piercing gaze, and I remember he looked at me and he said, "You're a writer."
Wow.
It might even have been around other people. It might not have been a private moment. He was just like, "You're a writer." And I felt this sense of, flowing through me of that I had needed to hear that from an authority figure. Because I think one of the things that is true of writers, in my opinion, is that writers very often don't know if they're writers or not. They're always writing. I was writing from the time I could write. They're always writing, but they always have self-doubt. Am I really a writer? Yeah. Because people who aren't that good at writers, they don't doubt it that much. You know what I mean? They sit down and write and they don't worry about it. You know what I mean? But when writer is really a writer, they tend to wonder, should I give this up? Am I a failure? We were talking, you and I, about being, the whole thing about being a failure and being success.
Yeah. I would love for you to tell that story about your first musical, which you began writing in the musical theater grad program at NYU.
Yes.
And then it was produced off Broadway, and it didn't go the way you expected.
Yes, it got really scathing reviews, and it got one really good review in the New Yorker. The New Yorker. But
one wise critic in New York.
Yes, the one smart, clued-in person. But it didn't. It got really bad reviews, not just a little bit bad. And when something like that happens, you've been working on something for years and years and years and years, and then something like that happens. For me, it was sort of like a moment in time. I mean, I was really brought up short. In a good way. It got my attention. Let me put it that way. And this isn't the story you wanted me to tell, but I just want to tell this story, which is that I can remember a moment walking on Broadway with where I lived then with my daughter. She was in a stroller, and I remember I stopped short because it was such a powerful moment for me privately, because I was having this thought, and the thought was, am I going to let 9 strangers who I've never met determine the course of my life? Because I was having serious thoughts like, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, maybe I'm really bad at this, which is an understandable thing to be thinking. But I had this other thought come in, which was, am I going to allow these people I've never met, who I don't even know if I even agree with them, like if they and I agree on things, am I going to allow them to dictate my life? And I suddenly realized, no, I can't. And that was when I also realized I'm not doing this for a review, and I'm not pretending that, it doesn't feel really nice to get a good review. I mean, everyone likes praise. It's really hard not. It's like saying I don't like chocolate. I mean, it's delicious. You want praise, but is that why you're doing it? That became a question that I had to answer. And that was the next part of my writing life, where I was really involved with thinking thoughts like, I just want to write, and I have to let go of what the result looks like, or how much acclaim I get, or how much criticism I get. I have to decide that I'm going to write no matter what. And that was a good feeling. That sort of led me to the next phase in my life.
That actually is the story that I wanted you to tell, Winnie. But there was another one that you told me earlier tonight that happened 20 years later, the follow-up to that story.
Yes, so the follow-up is that 20 years later, I'm in Boston working on this play that I've written called Choice. That's about, to some extent, it's about abortion. And this young woman who worked at the theater came up to me and she said, "You have written my favorite musical. So wonderful to meet you." And I figured she's talking about Wicked. And she said, "You've written Birds of Paradise, and that's me and my family's favorite musical." We see, Mitchell knows this. Mitchell had done a production of it in Cincinnati before we did it off Broadway and got those terrible reviews. Right. And this young woman came from Cincinnati, and her family had bootlegged, tape recorded it, and we used to listen to it in their car. And so she said, "I know all the songs by heart." When I looked at her face, and I realized, like, this musical that I was tempted to feel like was my failure, had been a source of joy for an entire family. So I had to start. Well, that wasn't the only time, but that's one of the many times in my life when I've started to really go, one must define failure and success for oneself. Yeah. One must not take it on from what it says in the paper, or what the culture says, or what people are saying. It's so personal. It's really a spiritual matter, and it's something you have to define for yourself. And I think it's very important for any artist.
Yeah, that's a rich lesson. Thank you. Our time is going so fast, and I want to show the photos that we have.
Yeah,
A walk
thanks.
down memory lane.
Well, this is the play we were talking about.
Yeah, the first play that we were in together.
And Mark, you designed this.
I made the poster
Yeah.
on a silk screen in the basement of Theatre Intime. And while the paint was drying, we laid out each poster on a different step on the staircase down to the basement of Theatre Intime.
This is gorgeous. And so this is you and I.
Yeah, the second play we were in together a few months later was Lovers by Brian Friel, a beautiful Irish play about two high school kids dealing with a pregnancy. And he wants a professional career, and she's thrilled about the baby, and there's some trouble between them.
And it's really romantic, and it's funny. It's a beautiful play.
It's a beautiful play. So
that's the comedy group I was mentioning that I formed with these three other great people pretty soon after I graduated Princeton. And like I said, that was a training ground for me, but I just thought I was having fun, which I think is a clue for if there are any people in the audience who are Princeton students who are close to graduating and thinking of a career in the arts.
Yeah.
That you do have to find that you do have to hold on to the innocence and fun of creation. You don't want to let that be beaten out of you, so to speak. It's your job in a way to hold on to it, to find ways to have a great time.
Oh, this is me in my first professional job, which happened a few months after Princeton. It's the Dybbuk at the Public Theater, directed by Joseph Chaikin. And the story behind this job is that I wrote a part of my senior thesis at Princeton about the Dybbuk, which is about a demonic possession of a bride. I'm the hapless bridegroom whose bride gets possessed at the wedding by the soul of her dead lover. So our teacher, Winnie's and my great mentor, Dan Seltzer, who was the founder of the theater program at Princeton. There actually were no practical theater classes at Princeton until Dan started them in Winnie's freshman year. Read my thesis and handed it to a friend, Joe Chaikin. And about 3 months after I graduated, with no idea of what I was doing next, my phone rang and my mother came into my room and said, Joe Chaikin is on the phone.
And suddenly you're working at the Public Theater.
Yep.
And you're an employed actor.
I was an employed actor.
And
soon to be a distinguished busboy.
And is that when you joined Equity? But yeah. I mean, but because people, a lot of times say, how do you get started, or how do you? And what you do is you just have to do the next thing that's sort of, you know what I mean? You have to just keep doing interesting things, and eventually one of those things will reach somebody who can help you, I think, or who need. I would put it this way: who can use you, right? Who can make use of your talents,
Yeah, and you never know when that's going to happen.
You never know when that's going to happen.
Who that person is going to be who opens that door.
Yeah, Dan Seltzer.
The next slide.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say Dan Seltzer was such an important figure in my life because he's the person who interviewed me to get into Princeton. And I know that I wouldn't have gotten into Princeton if I hadn't met Dan Seltzer. And
Me too. I told you this story that I was at Horace Mann in the Bronx in high school, and Dan came to our school and had a gathering of all the kids who were interested in theater and pitched Princeton as a theater school, which nobody had ever heard of before. Who the hell goes to Princeton for theater? But he was trying to build a program, which he really did beautifully. So tell us about this.
Well, this is kind of like backstage, you could say, I guess, or at my so-called life. This is Claire Danes when she was about 14 years old, and this is me, obviously. And it probably was taken, I think it was taken like in her little classroom. She used to go to class, in between shots.
She was still in high school.
She was still in high school. She had a lot of, she had to write papers and, take French exams and, all this stuff while she was being this brilliant actress. And because she had so much schooling to do, she didn't get a lot of rehearsal. So the performances you're seeing from her at that age in My So-Called Life, she was amazing. She's a brilliant actress. So that was me, with Claire.
Yeah, one of those people who came into your life and sent you on a new track.
Well, yeah, because the story with that is that after I wrote My So-Called Life, I remember I had a moment of terror, actually, more than one. But this particular one had to do with, I remember thinking to myself, what if we can't find the girl to play this part?
Yeah.
And Ed Zwick, who was my mentor in TV, he and Marshall were my mentors in TV. He said to me, if we don't find her, we won't do the show. And that really made me feel better because I was frightened that we wouldn't find somebody. But then he further said to me, but we're going to find her and you're going to fall in love with her.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, great. Let's go to the final slide.
Oh, the final slide is you giving me my Lily Award.
Exactly. One of the best nights I can remember. So Winnie received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Lilies, which is the League of Professional Theater Women, and it honors outstanding women in the theater. And Stephen Schwartz was scheduled to present the award and got sick. Much to my delight, I have to say. And I got called to present the award and finally got the chance after all those years.
And it was kind of perfect that you would be there because, that was a great night. Do we have any questions from the audience?
This is a good time maybe to go to the audience questions, and I think Ro has some for us.
Really? Or maybe there are no questions. If there are
lots of questions.
Oh, good.
So let's start with a question for Winnie. Can you please share more with us about your creative process? Do you structure time for writing daily? And where do you draw your inspiration from?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. I don't daily write, I have to say. It really depends on where I'm at in my life and in the project's life. Like, of course, I'm daily writing when I'm in a situation where that's necessary, but I'm not writing daily if I'm like right now, I'm coming off of a time when I was writing really nonstop, almost for like a year, almost. So I'm just letting myself not write right now. But how I draw inspiration is, let's say right now, for instance, I have an idea that I've had for more than 10 years. It's something I've been thinking about off and on for it's at least 10 years and probably 15 years. And I've made many notes about it, and I've never completely, I've never written it, but I've gotten a lot of ideas and thoughts and feelings about it. So what I'm doing right now, for instance, is I look over my old little notes and I keep a pad near me, and I just try to see where I see where I'm at now with the project. You know what I mean? I mean, if you have something like that you thought of doing, but you put aside or you never really did do it, sometimes for me, I have to almost reacquaint myself and re-fall in love with it. And that's part of my job, is to remember why I was in love with it, and to maybe even read some things that pertain to it. And while I'm reading, I might have a pad near me and I make little notes. I think about, the biggest thing for me is I don't open an empty final draft page and try to fill a script right away. I like to write in longhand and sort of make a big mess and not write in order and not necessarily write a real scene, but almost like this is sort of what the scene is, but it's kind of not really a scene yet. And all of that is to sort of trick myself into not making it so important that it be right, that it be perfect. You know what I mean? To sort of circumvent that impulse for perfectionism. So you sort of let yourself kind of play around. And then when I have enough, when I've amassed enough material, I try to put it into some sort of form. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it helped.
That actually leads well into our next question, which I think is a good question for both Winnie and Mark. After everything that you've both learned through your careers, if you could give one piece of advice to a student starting out in a career in the arts, what would that be?
What would you say, Mark Nelson?
I'd say have a life, not just a career, so that there's something that keeps you going and matters to you when your career fails, when you're rejected, when your show closes.
Mm-hmm.
And a kind of faith that keeps you, as Winnie said over and over again tonight, that keeps you interested, that keeps you creating, not for the success, not for the reviews, but to tell the story, to tell your story, to share what's in you.
That's beautiful. I mean, what I would say is what I was alluding to before, which is that when at my age now, I've done a lot of projects, and I notice a pattern, which is that with any creative project, there seems to be a time, and sometimes there's more than one, sometimes there's several. There's a time in the life of the project that it seems like the entire thing is falling apart. It seems like the entire thing is just a mess, and there's a block, there's some sort of roadblock, and it's not going to happen, and the whole thing is going to not happen. And that's part of what happens creatively, is we get ourselves out of that. Something intervenes. Sometimes it's really grace, but something intervenes, and that thing that you think was stopped, that could never happen, is alive again, and it moves forward, and it becomes, not with every project. Some projects don't have a life, but what I've found is that just as that happens in a creative project, that happens in your life as an artist. That it seems as if everything has fallen apart. It seems as if there's no you're lost. You feel completely lost. And that's just a feeling, as they say. That's not reality. It doesn't mean you are really lost, but it's a very strong feeling. And I would say my advice is to know that that's normal. It doesn't mean anything about you as an artist. It's not a referendum on your talent. And then the other thing I would say, having brought up the word talent, is it's great to have talent. It certainly helps. But what you really need is devotion. You really need a willingness to not give up. It's that great Winston Churchill, right? Never, never, never give up. I forget how many nevers there are, but there's a lot.
Thank you both for sharing that. And we actually have a question, Winnie, now that you've brought up that point in the project where you feel sort of stuck and you feel like it's hard to get past that. We have a question about how do you specifically get past that in the case of writer's block? If you don't know where you're going, do you just wait it out, or are there specific things that you turn to try to get past that?
I mean, of course I have waited sometimes, but you don't want to wait. You'll be waiting forever. It's not a good plan. I mean, when it comes to writer's block, what we're really talking about is fear. Fear is shutting you down, right? And it's what I was alluding to before. It's the feeling that you're supposed to be perfect, or you don't have enough, you're not good enough, and all of that. And what you have to do is trick yourself into writing begets writing. Okay, writing begets writing. So the more you wait, the more stuck you're going to feel. And the more you write, just write something terrible. I mean, that would be my advice. That's also, pretty much what Anne Lamott always says. You have to just be willing to sit down and you literally say to yourself, I'm going to write a really bad version of this scene. The worst possible version of this scene. because I can make it better later. And that's like your mantra. I'll make it better later. Just write a terrible, terrible version.
That's great to hear, and very liberating, I think, to have permission to write a terrible version, which I know I've done many times. Not always made better later, but sometimes. And speaking of writing, we have another question about your process and how it differs across different projects. A lot of Broadway musicals, like Wicked, are based on other works like novels, plays. And what's your opinion and your experience with original musicals versus adaptations as a writer and as a producer? And I might add also as a performer, Mark.
Well, I mean, writing is writing, in my opinion. I mean, whether you're adapting something or whether you have an original idea or you're adapting something, you still are writing. Because when you're adapting something, you can't be slavish with it. You can't hold to it. It isn't God. It's a piece of material, and you have to make it your own. So I don't really make that distinction so much. I think it's interesting to start with an idea, an underlying idea, but still you're going to find the same problems, the same challenges, I should say. What is this about? How can I really evoke, how can I best bring people an experience that will give them emotion? All those basics of like, who's the main character and what do they want? Just the basics.
And Winnie, didn't Gregory Maguire, the author of the novel, really understand that adapting it as a play was a whole different job than writing the novel?
Yes, he was very generous. Yeah, thank you. He was very generous. He gave us permission to, what we always said to him, and I think we really held to this. We were true to our word, is we said, we're going to stick to we're going to keep to the spirit of your book, but not to the plot. And that's really what we did. We had to come up with our own plot because we did feel that we could not put that plot on stage. It was, never mind the length aspect, but it wasn't us. It wasn't us. And in the end, you've got yourself, you're always asking yourself, and I know Mark does this too as an actor, what do I want to express? What do I want to express? Yeah. And it has to be that personal.
I've got a question, Winnie, if I may. Ro, is this okay?
Of course.
Jump in.
Pitching in a question from the audience. So the themes of your two best known works, My So-Called Life and Wicked, have a whole lot in common. They're both a lot about female friendship. They're both about the oddball outsider and the unseen value of that outsider. They're both about nonconformity and the one who doesn't fit ending up as the one who does best, who does the most good. And all those things remind me very much of who you were as a college student and the things that I learned from you when we were first friends and doing those plays together. So how do you think those themes from your own life and youth emerged in your writing?
Well, I don't think it was always conscious on my part. I think I was doing things that I found interesting personally, I mean, in both of those situations, people came to me with the idea saying, would you do this with us? Okay. I mean, one was Stephen Schwartz and one was Marshall and Ed. And they were saying, we have this idea. I mean, Stephen had the idea of adapting the Wicked novel, and Marshall and Ed had an idea. They wanted to do a TV show about a young teenage girl. And it's like, would you do this with us and for us? And I think what it was is that I was able to pour into both of those vessels, like things that I care about and things that I believe, but it wasn't always, a conscious intellectual decision, if you see what I mean. You know what I mean? I think it was often just my natural bent. I mean, one thing I do know about myself is I do like to explore stereotypes. In other words, I like to see that somebody is both a stereotype and also then uncover who they are in a deeper, more complex way, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I find that interesting in life, and I find that interesting, on stage and on screen to explore that. So I think that's one of the reasons that these things, the two works have some connection.
In common. Yeah. And was it because of what he saw in My So-Called Life, in those themes and those young female characters, that Stephen Schwartz approached you about Wicked?
It was. I think it was the combo platter of that he saw those themes in So-Called Life, and then also he knew I had written this musical, the aforementioned Birds of Paradise that Mitchell directed in Cincinnati.
Right.
And he knew that I had written a musical, and I think that gave him a lot of, and he had liked a lot of aspects of Birds of Paradise he had liked.
Me too.
So I think it made him feel confident because
I'd like to sing a little number from it.
Go ahead. I mean, I think it gave him a sense of confidence in me that I hadn't, if I had never ever written a musical, he might still have wanted to work with me, I think, but I think this gave him added confidence.
Yeah. So that quote failure ended up doing pretty good.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great other thing I want to really impart to anyone who's looking for advice or guidance, which is that the things that are our biggest failures can end up blossoming and having a ripple effect.
Yeah.
That our biggest failures in quotes. I don't believe in
because there is no.
Yeah, but that are seen as our big failures, right? Or as are perceived in that way, right? By the outside world, can very often be the pathway, the gateway to something so powerful in your life.
Yeah.
Either private or public,
You said something fantastic to me on the phone a couple of hours ago as we were getting ready for this. Also, that there are no real failures or real successes. They're all complicated. They're all blends. But the only true failure for an artist is being paralyzed by fear, and the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, so that you stop trying.
Right, because after all, if I was writing something and I was struggling, and that's not just an if, that's kind of my life. But let's say I'm writing something and I'm struggling, and it until the day I die, I'm struggling with it, and I never quote unquote finish it, but I died struggling with it. Yeah. Is that a success or a failure? I mean, to me, that's a beautiful thing, that I never gave up on it, that I never stopped writing it. We don't get to finish everything.
Ro, do you want to try for one more question?
Yes, I think we've got time for one last question, especially for Winnie. We have so many questions that we're not going to get to, I'm afraid, but let's just finish up with one question. Winnie, as an actor, having acted before, how much does that experience feed your writing or influence your writing?
Well, first of all, hi, Lenny. Hi, Lenny. I think it's been invaluable. I feel like I put myself in the actor's shoes, to be honest. Like when I'm writing a scene, I'm looking for ways that it could be fun for an actor to play that scene, or exciting, or that it could bring them somewhere, that it could give them something. Mark, as a teacher and as an actor, for a brilliant actor, he knows this very well. What are you going to play? What are you going to be about in the role? And it's like, if you can give the actor something exciting to get their teeth into, I think you have a really good chance of attracting a strong, exciting actor. I'm very aware of that, because I feel like actors are like part of my life, not just like part of my life, they are part of my life, because I don't write books. I don't write essays. I write so that people will want to get excited and perform something and give other people an experience. So it means that I have to always be thinking about the actor's point of view.
Yeah. And you're also creating great scenes because you know what actors need to catch fire.
Well, I'm trying. Yeah. That's definitely my goal.
So we have a little surprise to cap off the evening. Speaking of you're never finished, we stopped rehearsing the Typists in 1975, and we renewed rehearsals yesterday. So we're going to do a little 4-minute excerpt. This is an excerpt from Mark, the play that we were in together, which is The Typists, a 1-act, 2-character play by Murray Shiskull, which is about 2 people who work in an office, in a Manhattan office, typing advertising cards, typing addresses on the cards. They never know what they're selling because they never look at the back of the card. And they start the play in their 20s. And each time one of them leaves the room, he comes back or she comes back 10 years older. So by the time the play ends, they're in their 60s. So we're perfect casting.
Perfect casting now.
So we decided on a scene that takes place in their 60s, which we played when we were 20. And we're going to give it another shot now. You know, I've been thinking, Sil. I've been asking myself lately, what is it I really wanted? You know what the answer is to that, Sil? You know what it has to be? What I got, what I am. Maybe all I really wanted was to be sorry for myself.
Does anyone know what they want, Paul?
Don't you?
Not anymore. I thought I knew just as you did, but if that's what I wanted, why am I where I am today?
It doesn't make sense, does it?
I swore that at the first opportunity, I'd break away from my mother and my sister. I'd have nothing more to do with them, and that would be happiness for me. But here I am, still living with my mother, and every day I ask how my sister is, what she's doing, how her husband is, the children, and I don't give a damn, not a damn.
The things I don't give a damn about. So let's look into this. This is important.
I've always said that there's nothing more important than getting to know yourself. When you realize that people can live their whole lives without knowing themselves, without really getting to understand themselves, it reaches the ridiculous.
You are absolutely right.
Let's see what's behind it all. Let's study it for a moment.
All right, let's get into it. Why?
Why?
Why do you say that leaving your family would make you happy? If that's all there was to it, you could have left them years ago. No, there's something you're hiding.
You're not telling the truth. If all you wanted to do was feel sorry for yourself, all you'd have to do is sit in a corner and feel sorry for yourself. But no, that isn't it. What is it you're hiding?
The fact remains. You do care what happens to your family. You care a lot. That's why you phone every day. That's why you're always asking about your sister. You have to keep them together because you never developed emotionally enough to forget the past and start a new life for yourself.
You deliberately put yourself in situations where you had to fail. You had to rush into marriage, have children, and become burdened with impossible responsibilities, that the very things you were afraid of. You had to fail because it wasn't that you wanted to feel sorry for yourself. You wanted other people to feel sorry for you.
That's it. They alone could give you what you wanted. No one else, not even a husband. That's why you never got married. Now we're coming closer to it.
So they would pity and pamper you like a child. You mistook that for love, which was what you really wanted from them, the love which you couldn't get from your parents.
There it is. You wanted love.
You wanted love, of course.
Of course. Don't you see it now, Sil?
It's all so clear.
When you know something about yourself, that's when you can start doing something about it.
This has been one of the most enjoyable conversations that I've ever had, Paul.
I enjoyed it myself. And the afternoon's going pretty quick.
Thank God for that.
You know, thinking about it, I'm sure a lot better off than you are. That's the end of the scene.
That was fun.
Wow, Winnie and Mark, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for being here. This was a wonderful conversation to be part of.
Thank you so much, Ro.
Thank you so much for everything, Ro. And thank you, Judy. And thank everyone at behind the scenes, Leanna. And thanks.
Yes, thanks everyone on the team. And Mark and Winnie, we will put your Wintersession beanies in the mail. So you'll be getting those soon, even though this is virtual.
That's what we really did it for, yeah.
Exactly. You're getting the
I'm in it for the
beanie. And thank you to all of you who are watching, who watched this with us. It was great to have you here, and thank you for all of your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone, but thanks for being part of the conversation. We have more Wintersession events coming up this weekend and next week. This weekend we have a conversation between Jeff Nunukawa, professor of English, and Kara Swisher, tech journalist. And then through the next week, we have more conversations and more events that you can find at winter.princeton.edu. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did, and have a good night.